Once upon a time, in a bustling city called Los Angeles, there was a wealthy businessman named Edward. Edward was very serious and always busy with his work. He never had time for fun or love. One day, Edward was driving around in his fancy car. He was lost in a part of the city he didn't know. Edward was very worried. He saw a woman standing on the side of the road. Her name was Vivian, and she was very pretty. Edward stopped his car and asked Vivian for directions. Vivian was very helpful and showed Edward the way. Edward was thankful to Vivian and asked her if she wanted to ride in his car. Vivian said yes, and they started to drive together. As they drove, Edward and Vivian talked and laughed. They enjoyed each other's company. Edward found out that Vivian was not just pretty, but also smart and funny. He started to like her. "Vivian," Edward said, "would you like to spend more time with me?" Vivian smiled and said, "I'd love to, Edward." And that's how their unexpected journey began. After their chance meeting, Edward and Vivian spent more time together. They drove around the city, talking and laughing. Edward liked Vivian's wit and charm. Vivian liked Edward's kindness and sense of humor. One day, Edward had a big idea. He was going to a fancy party, and he wanted Vivian to go with him. "Vivian," Edward said, "I have a proposal for you." Vivian looked at Edward, her eyes wide with surprise. "A proposal?" she asked. Edward nodded. "Yes, a proposal. I have a party to go to and I want you to come with me." Vivian was shocked. She had never been to a fancy party before. She didn't have fancy clothes or fancy shoes, but she liked Edward and wanted to spend more time with him. Vivian looked at Edward, her eyes shining. "Edward," she said, "I would love to go to the party with you." Edward smiled, happy with Vivian's answer. He was looking forward to the party and even more to spending more time with Vivian. After Vivian agreed to go to the party with Edward, they started to prepare. Vivian was nervous. She had never been to a fancy party before. She didn't have pretty dresses or shiny shoes. Edward saw Vivian's worry. He wanted to help her. "Vivian," he said, "let's go shopping. We will find you a beautiful dress and shoes for the party." Vivian was surprised. "Really?" she asked. Edward nodded. "Yes, really, let's go." They went to a big store with lots of pretty dresses and shoes. Vivian tried on many dresses. Finally, she found a beautiful red dress. She looked at herself in the mirror and smiled. She felt like a princess. Next, they found shiny shoes that matched the dress. Vivian was very happy. She thanked Edward for his kindness. Edward looked at Vivian, now dressed in her new outfit. He was amazed by her transformation. She looked beautiful. "Vivian," he said, "you look stunning." Vivian blushed and said, "Thank you, Edward. I'm excited about the party." Edward smiled, looking forward to the party and the exciting times ahead with Vivian. After the shopping trip, Edward and Vivian were ready for the party. Edward looked handsome in his suit. Vivian looked beautiful in her red dress. At the party, everyone looked at Vivian. She was the prettiest lady there. Edward was very proud. They danced and laughed all night. Edward was happy to see Vivian enjoying herself. Vivian was happy to be with Edward. After the party, Edward and Vivian spent a lot of time together. They went to parks, they had nice dinners, they watched movies, they talked and laughed a lot. Slowly, Edward and Vivian started to like each other more. They were not just friends now. They were falling in love. One day, Edward looked at Vivian. He said, "Vivian, I really like spending time with you. I think I am falling in love with you." Vivian looked at Edward. She smiled. She said, "Edward, I feel the same way. I am falling in love with you too." Edward was very happy. He looked forward to spending more and more time with Vivian. After Edward and Vivian said they loved each other, things were not easy. Edward's friends didn't like Vivian. They said she was not good for Edward. This made Vivian sad. Edward was angry with his friends. "Vivian is a good person," he said. "You don't know her like I do." Edward's friends didn't listen. They kept saying bad things about Vivian. This made Edward and Vivian very sad. One day, Edward and Vivian had a big fight. "I can't take this anymore," Vivian said. "I don't want to make you sad." Edward was sad too, but he loved Vivian. He didn't want to lose her. "Vivian," he said, "I love you. I don't care what my friends say." Vivian looked at Edward. She was still sad, but she loved Edward too. "Edward," she said, "I love you too, but this is hard for me." Edward understood. He promised to make things better. He wanted to be with Vivian. He was very happy with her. After their big fight, Edward made a decision. He decided to stand up for Vivian. He went to his friends. He said, "I love Vivian. If you are my friends, you will accept her." Edward's friends were surprised, but they saw Edward's love for Vivian. They decided to give Vivian a chance. Vivian was happy when she heard this. She was glad that Edward stood up for her. They were both happy again. Edward said to Vivian, "I'm sorry for the trouble, Vivian. I want us to be happy. I want us to be together always." Vivian smiled at Edward. She said, "I want that too, Edward. I love you." Edward and Vivian hugged each other. They were ready to face any problem together. They knew their love was strong. Edward was happy. He looked forward to a happy future with Vivian. He knew they could face anything together. After all the troubles, Edward and Vivian were ready to leave the hotel. They were ready to start a new life together. Edward looked at Vivian. He said, "Vivian, we have changed. We have learned a lot. We have learned about love and acceptance. We have learned about being true to ourselves." Vivian looked at Edward. She smiled. She said, "Yes, Edward, we have learned a lot. I'm ready to start a new life with you." Edward and Vivian left the hotel. They walked hand in hand. They looked forward to their new life together. They had changed. They had grown. They had learned. They were ready to face the future together. Edward and Vivian were happy. They knew they had a bright future together. Ever heard a story about love, challenges, and standing up for what you believe in? Well, here's one for you. I'm curious to know what lessons or morals you think we can learn from it. Please drop your thoughts in the comments section below. It's all about understanding and learning from each other's perspectives. Can't wait to hear what you think. Also, jot down any words you might not know the meaning of. Look them up and remember them for some awesome vocabulary practice. And hey, if you enjoyed this story and want more engaging tales, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Story Talk English. Learn English with stories and movies for an exciting way to improve your language skills.